So I've been playing through the LOFTIA beta for the past couple of weeks now, and after about 5 to 10 hours of gameplay, I have a lot of thoughts, specifically about the early game experience. Before we get into it, I do want to set expectations. This is beta gameplay, and these are my first impressions. I haven't finished the full beta quest line yet, and a lot of what I'm talking about could be adjusted, improved, or changed entirely before the full release. So this is less of a final review and more of how the game feels to play right now. One of the strongest parts of LOFTIA is the concept itself. The game is built around sustainability and eco-living, and it doesn't feel like that's just a theme layered on top. It's actually embedded into how you play. A lot of systems directly reflect that idea. For example, you're not just collecting random resources, you're gathering scrap materials, refining them through machines, and using those refined resources to build and progress. Even energy systems are tied into this through solar panels, which you need to rely on for powering different parts of your gameplay. There are also systems like permits and community-driven projects, which makes it feel like you're contributing to something bigger than just your own island and character progression. It feels like the entire game loop is built around this idea of rebuilding and sustainability, and that concept is one of the most cohesive parts of the entire experience thus far. Visually, the game is also really strong for where it's at in development. The art style is very soft and cozy, definitely leaning into that warm, approachable aesthetic. It might not be everyone's preference, but regardless of taste, it's very consistent and intentional. Performance-wise, it does run smoothly. Load-ins are relatively quick, and I didn't experience anything that felt like it was breaking immersion or causing major issues. For a beta build, it's pretty impressive because this is usually where games tend to feel the most unpolished, but I would say in LOFTIA this was not an element that fell short. The multiplayer aspect also really stood out to me in a good way. For a beta build, I expected some instability or server issues, but it actually held up surprisingly well. There were consistently a lot of players in the same spaces at once, and it still felt stable, active, and very alive without any major issues. Even just running around the city, you can constantly see other players moving throughout the world, which makes everything feel a lot more connected rather than isolated. That said, I do want to add a little bit of context on how this feels overall. Obviously, LOFTIA is an MMO, so multiplayer is going to be a big part of the core design. That's expected, and it makes sense for the type of game that it is. But as someone who was initially drawn to the concept because it presents itself as a cozy game first and foremost, I did notice that multiplayer isn't just something happening in the background. It feels fairly encouraged throughout gameplay. You're never forced to interact with others, and you can absolutely play at your own pace, but the world design and systems do make community presence feel like a meaningful part of the experience. So I think this really comes down to player preference. If you enjoy social gameplay and like feeling like you're sharing a world with other people, this will probably feel like a really strong point in the game's favor. But if you're more of a solo cozy player, someone who likes logging in, doing your own thing, and staying in your own space, it can feel a bit more present than you might expect. To give a bit of context from my experience with this, I've played a few other online or multiplayer style games that I think are useful comparison points. For example, in Heartopia, which is also an online game, the limited number of players and overall structure makes it feel a bit more isolated. Even though it's technically multiplayer, it didn't really feel like other players were constantly around me or influencing the experience in a notable way. And then in other games like Genshin Impact, social or multiplayer elements feel completely optional. You can engage with other players if you want to, but the core experience is very much designed to be played solo. I'm only bringing those up because if you've played those games before, it might help give some reference for how LOFTIA feels in comparison. Not to say one approach is better than the other, just that they create very different player experiences. LOFTIA also includes basically all of the core systems you'd expect from a cozy game. There's gardening, fishing, crafting, cooking, and resource gathering, all of the familiar mechanics that make the genre feel comforting and easy to pick up. What I like is that it doesn't feel like these systems are just included for the sake of ticking boxes. They're actually tied into progression and your overall ability to expand your space and capabilities. So if you're someone who already enjoys cozy games, it immediately feels familiar in a really good way. The quest design is also pretty well thought out so far. There's a clear structure to how you progress, and the pacing of unlocking new systems feels intentional. You're not completely left to figure things out on your own, which is especially important in a game with this many systems. The tutorials are also very detailed. They walk you through mechanics step by step, which helps prevent that early game confusion that a lot of similar games tend to have. At times, it can can feel like a lot of information at once, but overall it does a good job of making sure you understand what you're doing. And lastly, for pros, character customization is already one of the standout features for me. There's a lot of depth here, and more importantly, a lot of diversity in your options. It feels like you can actually create a character that reflects who you are rather than being limited to a very narrow set of presets. For a game that's in beta, this is already in a really strong place. But of course, with any honest review, with all the pros, we have to notice the cons. The pacing was something that was incredibly noticeable to me from the beginning. It feels a little contradictory at times. On one hand, the early game can feel really overwhelming. You're introduced to a lot of quests very quickly. It doesn't always give you time to fully complete or process one task before another one gets added in. There were multiple moments where I felt like I was trying to finish gathering materials for one objective, and suddenly I had 2 or 3 new quests layered on top of it. It creates this feeling of constantly trying to keep up rather than focusing on just one thing at a time. That being said, I do think that this might be intentional for beta testing, almost like they want players to explore different systems freely and see what the players would like to dive into the most. On the other hand, the actual gameplay systems themselves are quite slow paced. You do have to wait for solar panels to recharge before you can use certain machines, which ties directly into the sustainability mechanics, while also introduces downtime between actions. Farming also requires some consistent attention. You have to water crops regularly and then wait for them to grow over time. While there's a lot happening conceptually, the actual progression is more measured and patient. And one feature that adds to that a little bit negatively, in my opinion, is that there's no fast travel or teleportation systems. That means moving between areas can take a decent amount of time, especially when you're juggling multiple quests in different locations. It really becomes noticeable when you factor in inventory limits, because you often end up needing to go back and forth between your home and quest locations. I don't find it as bad when you're in a specific location, but jumping between areas can be a bit tedious. From a gameplay flow perspective, it can slow things down quite a bit, especially in the early game when you're still trying to establish momentum and get all your resources to travel around the map. There are also some limitations when it comes to building and customization, particularly on your island. Right now, there's a cap of 100 placed items in total, which includes both interior and exterior decorations. That alone already creates some restriction if you're someone who likes to build extensively. On top of that, there's no landscaping system yet, and your house is fixed in the center of the island, which limits how much you can reshape or design your space. The island itself is circular, which is visually interesting and unique, but it can feel a bit awkward when you're trying to plan out larger or more structured builds. The actual placement system is solid, and the items themselves are well designed, but overall it leans more towards guided creativity rather than full freedom at this stage. So if you're someone who really loves deep building or decorating systems, this is something you'll probably notice early on. One thing I noticed that falls a bit more into quality of life issues is the tool and quick bar system. Right now, you only have 2 tools available on your quick access bar at a time, which means if you need to switch between multiple tools and their seeds, you have to go into the menu and manually swap them out. It's not something that completely breaks the experience, but it does interrupt the flow of gameplay quite a bit, especially when you're moving between tasks quickly or trying to plant a lot of crops at one time. In a game that already has a slower, more intentional pace, it just adds a little friction to moment-to-moment gameplay that you'll start to notice after a while. There are also, as expected, small glitches and bugs here and there. I totally don't have an issue with that in beta. It is why we play the beta after all, and I will say that for a beta test, this was one of the least glitchy games I have played pre-full release. Overall, my experience with the LOFTIA beta has been positive. That being said, I do feel like some of the pacing and certain system inconveniences did hold me back from playing as much as I probably would have liked. Between how grind heavy some parts of the early game can feel, the back and forth travel between locations to gather resources, buy seeds, or even just switching out tools through the menu, there's a bit of friction in the moment-to-moment gameplay that you definitely start to notice over time. It doesn't ruin the experience by any means, but it does slow down the flow of actually settling into the game and just enjoying it at your own pace. Going into this, I honestly wasn't entirely sure what to expect. I was excited for something with a strong concept, a good message, and developers who clearly care about what they're building and are putting real intention behind it. I expected a fairly simple, cozy game experience, something still early in development, and maybe a bit surface level in terms of systems. But what surprised me the most is how structured and intentional everything already feels, even this early in beta. The systems are clearly designed with purpose, the world has a strong identity, and there's a really clear direction behind what the game is trying to be. So overall, I think LOFTIA is definitely one to keep an eye on, especially if you enjoy slower paced, community-driven, cozy games. A lot of people have already fallen in love with it and feel confident about picking it up once it fully releases. For me personally, I'm more in a wait and see position. I'd like to see how the game continues to develop, what the final price point looks like, and I'd probably check out more reviews and gameplay once it's further along in early access or full release. So it's not a strong yes or a strong no. It's more that I enjoyed the gameplay I experienced and can definitely see myself coming back to it once some of the quality of life updates and refinements are in place. From what I've seen, the developers are very attentive and proactive when it comes to listening to feedback and rolling out updates, which is always a really good sign for a game in this stage of development. Because of that, I'm hopeful this does end up being a really solid, cozy MMO experience in the long run. For a lot of people, it already might be, and depending on what you're looking for in a game, it could absolutely be for you too. But my general recommendation would be to keep an eye on it, check out how it evolves over the next updates, and make a decision once you've seen a bit more of its direction. But yeah, those are just my first impressions so far. I'll probably revisit it once there are more updates or once it moves into early access, because I am curious to see how it evolves. So keep an eye out for any future videos from me regarding this game. If you've also played the beta, I'd be really interested to hear what your experience has been like so far, especially if you had a different perspective on any of the systems I talked about. But that's everything I have for this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys took something away from it. If you did, be sure to leave it a like and a comment, and if you're feeling generous, you can even subscribe. I do hope to see you guys all in the next video, but if not, bye bye!